Have you ever wondered how much of your life is truly yours, and how much has been quietly shaped by someone who knew exactly which emotional strings to pull? It is unsettling to consider that manipulation rarely feels like manipulation. It feels like guidance, care, approval, or even love, until one day you realize your choices were never really your own. This is where the danger begins, because the most manipulative people do not force you to obey. They train you to surrender willingly. They reshape your perception so subtly that you start doubting your own instincts, questioning your own clarity, and relying on their version of reality to feel safe. Most people believe manipulation happens loudly, with aggression or control, but the truth is far more delicate. The most dangerous manipulators operate in silence. They sense your emotional patterns, your fears, your wounds, and they feed them just enough to keep you connected. They understand the psychology of influence, the quiet art of planting suggestions, the slow erosion of boundaries disguised as support. And the moment you begin to wake up to this, the moment your awareness sharpens, something inside you shifts. You start noticing inconsistencies, subtle pressures, the way your energy changes around certain people. It feels like stepping out of a fog you did not know you were in, and suddenly every detail becomes painfully clear. What you are about to discover may challenge the way you see relationships, trust, and even yourself. This journey is not just about identifying manipulative people. It is about reclaiming your inner authority, your emotional sovereignty, and the strength to recognize influence before it enters your mind. And as you listen, notice what resonates in your own experience. You have probably encountered at least one person who left you doubting your intuition, questioning your feelings, or shrinking your voice to avoid conflict. You ever felt this happening to you? Then stay with me, because what you will uncover next may surprise you and help you understand why awareness is the only true protection. And before we move forward, tell me in the comments if you have ever felt that someone was quietly shaping your decisions. Leave your like to help this message reach more people, and check if you are already subscribed to the channel so you do not miss what comes next as we continue unfolding this deeper layer of perception that is only beginning to reveal itself. When you begin to look closely at how manipulation actually works, you realize it is less about control and more about distortion. Emotional manipulators rarely attack your strength directly. Instead, they weaken your clarity one subtle moment at a time. They twist your perception, redirect your attention, and nudge your emotions in ways that make you second-guess your own inner voice. Their greatest talent is creating confusion so softly that you mistake it for caring. They do not demand power. They make you hand it over. An emotional manipulator studies you with quiet precision. They notice what makes you hesitate, what makes you soften, what makes you feel guilty, what makes you want to prove yourself. They sense your sensitivity and use it as leverage, turning your empathy into a doorway through which they enter your decisions. They apologize when necessary, praise you strategically, and mirror your emotions just enough to make you feel understood. But beneath the surface, every gesture is calculated to keep you emotionally dependent on their approval. Over time, you start adjusting your tone, your reactions, even your desires to avoid disappointing them. You tell yourself you are being kind, flexible, understanding, but slowly you stop recognizing the person you were before they entered your life. This shift never happens in a single moment. It is a gradual erosion, a quiet psychological drift, and by the time you notice the weight of their influence, you have already internalized their expectations as your own. What makes this dynamic so dangerous is that emotional manipulators do not need to raise their voice or create dramatic scenes. Their influence thrives in subtle emotional pressure, in the gentle framing of situations that always places them in the position of the wounded one, the misunderstood one, the reasonable one. They make you believe you are the one who should adjust, apologize, or try harder, and the more you try, the more the balance of power shifts toward them. And once you begin to see how this pattern forms, you also start to sense how many of your past choices may have been shaped not by your true intuition, but by someone who knew exactly how to guide your emotions without ever revealing their hand. leaving you with the growing awareness that this kind of influence is far more common than most people realize and far more subtle than it first appears, leading naturally into the deeper layers of manipulation you are about to uncover as this exploration continues. As you start recognizing the emotional manipulator, another figure becomes equally dangerous, the charismatic manipulator. Unlike the emotional one, who thrives in subtle guilt and quiet pressure, the charismatic manipulator uses charm, confidence, and magnetic presence to lower your defenses. They know how to make you feel seen, valued, chosen, and this sensation becomes the foundation of their influence. Their words seem wise, their guidance feels empowering, and their approval becomes something you unconsciously seek. This is how their power begins, not through force, but through fascination. Charismatic manipulators understand the psychology of admiration. They know how to create an emotional atmosphere where you feel uplifted in their presence, as if they hold an insight you need or a certainty you wish you had. They speak with conviction, even when they are wrong. They offer solutions with authority, even when they lack depth. And, because they radiate confidence, you begin trusting their judgment more than your own. This is not accidental. It is a crafted persona designed to influence the thoughts, choices, and direction of those around them. Slowly, you notice that your decisions start aligning with their opinions. You adopt their viewpoints, echo their beliefs, adjust your behavior to fit the world they describe. Their influence is so subtle that you do not realize you are being guided. You believe you are simply following someone inspiring. The danger lies in how easily admiration can become dependency, and how effortlessly dependency transforms into control when the person being admired has intentions you cannot yet see. The charismatic manipulator never asks directly for your loyalty. They simply create an environment where you offer it willingly. You feel grateful for their presence, appreciative of their perspective, almost privileged to be close to them. But beneath that charm is a deep need to shape others, to stand at the center of every perception, to become the reference point for what is right, smart, valuable, or true. And once you begin to sense how charm can be used as a tool of influence rather than connection, you realize how many times in your life someone's confidence may have overshadowed your own intuition, making you question whether their magnetism was authentic guidance or simply another form of subtle control that now leads us deeper into the next shape manipulation can take, one that disguises itself as fragility rather than strength. While charismatic manipulators use strength and confidence to draw you in, the victim manipulator uses the opposite. They present themselves as fragile, mistreated, overlooked, or consistently unlucky. At first, your empathy responds automatically. You feel compelled to help, to support, to protect. But what begins as compassion slowly becomes responsibility, and what feels like generosity transforms into emotional captivity. The victim manipulator understands that guilt is one of the most powerful tools of influence, especially when directed at someone kind-hearted. They never make direct demands. Instead, they hint at disappointment, express subtle sadness, or imply abandonment whenever you set a boundary. They make you feel as though your independence hurts them, your needs burden them, and your absence wounds them. Over time, you start adjusting your behavior to avoid triggering their emotional collapse. You check on them more often than you check on yourself. You silence your frustration because you do not want to appear insensitive. You take on the emotional weight they strategically place on your shoulders. The victim manipulator thrives on appearing harmless, yet their influence is anything but gentle. Their fragility is selective, appearing precisely when it benefits them. When they need support, they crumble. When they need control, they suffer. And when they sense you pulling away, they suddenly become the most misunderstood person in the world. Their vulnerability is not a cry for help. It is a silent strategy to bind you through emotional obligation. What makes this dynamic so draining is that you never realize the imbalance while it is happening. You believe you are helping someone who needs you, unaware that your empathy is being turned into a leash. The more responsible you feel for their emotions, the more control they gain over your actions. And once you recognize this pattern, You start seeing how their pain was never random but timed, calculated, and directed, with unsettling precision, opening the path to understanding the next layer of manipulation waiting beneath the surface. Before we continue, tell me in the comments if you have ever felt trapped by someone who played the victim to shape your decisions. Your insight may help others recognize the same pattern in their own lives. As you begin to see how emotional weakness can be weaponized, another form of manipulation emerges with a completely different mask: the intellectual manipulator. This person does not rely on charm, vulnerability, or emotional dependency. Instead, they use logic, knowledge, and selective reasoning to shape how you think. Their influence is built on the illusion of superiority, and they position themselves as the one who understands everything more clearly than you ever could. At first, this can feel enlightening, even impressive. But with time, their certainty becomes oppressive, and their intelligence becomes a cage disguised as clarity. The intellectual manipulator knows how to win arguments without raising their voice. They shift conversations toward their advantage, redirect blame through complex explanations, and dismantle your perspective as if it were naive or uninformed. They construct narratives with such confidence that you start doubting your own reasoning. You begin to rely on their interpretations of events, their explanations of problems, their version of reality, until your own thoughts start losing their authority. What makes them so difficult to identify is that they rarely appear malicious. They present their dominance as helpful guidance, as intellectual refinement, as a necessary correction to your supposed misunderstandings. You feel compelled to accept their viewpoint, not because they force you, but because they make you feel inadequate for questioning them. Their superiority becomes an invisible pressure, shaping your decisions through the fear of being wrong, uninformed, or less capable. Over time, your internal voice grows quiet. You hesitate before expressing your ideas, anticipating how they will deconstruct them. You adapt your opinions to avoid conflict, or worse, you stop forming opinions altogether, absorbing theirs as the safer alternative. The power they hold is not emotional dependency or guilt, it is cognitive dependency. They program your thinking the way someone rewrites a system piece by piece until the original structure is hardly recognizable. And once you recognize this pattern, you start seeing how often intimidation comes not through emotional pressure, but through intellectual dominance, leading you to question how much of your inner world has been shaped not by manipulation of feelings, but by manipulation of thought, setting the stage for yet another form of influence, driven not by the mind, but by the ego that demands admiration and control. After witnessing how intellectual dominance can quietly rewrite your thinking, you encounter one of the most destructive forms of manipulation, the narcissistic manipulator. Unlike the previous types, who operate through emotion, charm, or intellect, the narcissist targets your sense of identity. Their goal is not simply to influence you, but to shape how you see yourself, often in ways that erode your confidence and make you dependent on their approval. They do this through a cycle of idealization and devaluation that keeps you emotionally unbalanced and constantly seeking their validation. At first, the narcissist lifts you up. They admire you, praise you, and create an intense sense of connection that feels rare and meaningful. This initial phase is intentional. It prepares you for what comes next, because once they have secured your trust and affection, the energy shifts. Suddenly, your strengths become flaws, your opinions become threats, and your needs become inconveniences. Their words are sharp but disguised as honesty. Their criticism feels personal, yet you tell yourself they are only trying to help. This confusion is precisely what they rely on. Their manipulation thrives on destabilizing your self-worth. They want you to question your value, your perceptions, and your emotional reactions. The more uncertain you become, the easier it is for them to position themselves as the one who knows better, decides better, and judges better. Their approval becomes a rare reward, and their disapproval becomes a punishment you try desperately to avoid. In this dynamic, your identity slowly shifts from autonomous to reactive, shaped by their moods, reactions, and expectations. What makes the narcissistic manipulator especially dangerous is their need for control wrapped inside the illusion of superiority. They do not simply want influence, they want significance, admiration, and emotional dominance. They take up psychological space, forcing everything to revolve around them while leaving you with a shrinking sense of self. Even when you try to pull away, they may reappear with affection, promises, or sudden vulnerability, creating a cycle that keeps you emotionally attached despite the harm. And once you begin to recognize this cycle, you start seeing how many pieces of your identity were shaped not by your true self, but by someone who needed you small to feel powerful, guiding you toward understanding a different kind of manipulator who cloaks influence not in superiority, but in moral authority, that appears righteous on the surface, yet carries hidden intentions underneath. After seeing how the narcissistic manipulator reshapes your identity through superiority and emotional dominance, another figure emerges with a more deceptive mask: the moral or spiritual manipulator. Unlike the narcissist who uses ego or the intellectual manipulator who uses logic, this one uses virtue. They present themselves as principled, righteous, enlightened, or ethically superior. Their influence does not rely on intimidation or flattery, but on the subtle suggestion that they occupy a higher ground and that questioning them means questioning integrity itself. This kind of manipulator understands the psychological weight of morality. They know that people naturally want to be seen as good, fair, compassionate, and aligned with higher values. So they frame their expectations as moral obligations and their criticisms as corrections meant to elevate you. Instead of saying you are wrong, they imply you are disappointing some greater standard. Instead of disagreeing with you, they suggest you are not being your best self. Slowly, they turn your desire to be a good person into a vulnerability they can leverage. What makes them so dangerous is that their manipulation feels justified. You do not feel controlled, you feel guided. They cloak influence in the language of growth, purpose, and purity. And because their words appear to come from a place of wisdom or spirituality, you hesitate to challenge them. You begin adjusting your behavior not out of fear, but out of a quiet sense of guilt, as if failing to comply would make you less worthy, less evolved, or less aligned with the values they claim to defend. Over time, their moral framing becomes a tool of subtle domination. They decide what is correct, what is meaningful, what is ethical, what is spiritually valid. You lose the ability to question them without feeling as though you are betraying something important. And this is where their power thrives, not in force, but in the quiet erosion of your confidence in your own moral compass. Once you start recognizing this dynamic, you begin to see how manipulation does not always appear destructive. Sometimes it wears the mask of purity, guidance, and good intentions, making it even harder to identify. And as this awareness sharpens, you step closer to understanding how deeply influence can shape your perception without ever appearing harmful. Before we continue, leave a comment sharing whether you have ever met someone who used morality or virtue to influence your choices. Your perspective might help someone recognize a pattern they have been unable to name. As you begin to recognize the many faces manipulation can take, you also start noticing something even more subtle: the internal signals that reveal when you are under someone's influence without realizing it. These signs rarely appear dramatic. Instead, they manifest quietly, in the spaces between your thoughts, in the slight hesitations you cannot explain, in the emotional tension that rises around certain people. Your intuition often detects manipulation long before your mind understands it, sending warnings through shifts in mood, energy, and instinct. One of the earliest signs is emotional exhaustion. You leave interactions feeling drained rather than supported, as if your inner strength has been quietly siphoned. Another sign is inconsistency in your own reactions. You begin changing your tone, your expressions, even your boundaries depending on who is present, adjusting yourself to keep the peace or avoid subtle disapproval. This adaptation feels small at first, almost harmless, but it slowly becomes a pattern that shapes your identity around someone else's expectations. Doubt is another signal. Not healthy introspection, but recurring self-questioning that appears after conversations, where you replay your words and wonder if you were too harsh, too sensitive, too demanding. This doubt does not come from a desire to grow. It comes from an emotional imprint someone else has placed on you. Over time, your intuition becomes quieter, overshadowed by the need to fit into the emotional world that the manipulator has created around you. You may also notice a gradual loss of clarity. Situations that once felt simple now feel foggy. Decisions that were once instinctive now feel confusing. This confusion is not accidental. It is often the byproduct of subtle influence. Manipulators thrive in ambiguity because it keeps you searching for their approval, their interpretation, their version of events. The more uncertain you feel, the more power they quietly accumulate. Perhaps the most revealing sign is the shift in your emotional baseline. You stop feeling fully yourself. Your confidence diminishes, your joy becomes muted, and your inner voice grows faint. It is as if a part of you is being overshadowed, not forcefully but gradually, through a slow erosion that becomes hard to detect until you step back and see how far from yourself you have drifted. And once these signals become visible, you begin to understand just how deeply influence can operate within you, preparing the ground for the next realization. Why manipulators are so often drawn to people who feel deeply, think deeply, and live with a sensitivity others may never fully understand. When you look closely at who manipulators choose to influence, a revealing pattern emerges. They are often drawn to people who feel deeply, think carefully, and carry a natural sensitivity that most others overlook. Manipulators do not target the indifferent or the emotionally closed. They seek those with empathy, intuition, and a strong capacity for connection, because these qualities make someone trusting, reflective, and willing to understand rather than reject. In other words, the very traits that make someone emotionally intelligent can also make them vulnerable to subtle influence. Empathetic individuals tend to give others the benefit of the doubt, assuming good intentions until proven otherwise. This openness allows manipulators to slip into their emotional space without resistance. Sensitive people also feel responsible for the emotional atmosphere around them. If someone seems upset, disappointed, or unstable, they instinctively try to restore balance. Manipulators recognize this instinct and use it to create situations where the sensitive person becomes the stabilizer, the caretaker, the emotional anchor, taking on roles that quietly drain their strength. Those who think deeply are also susceptible in a different way. They analyze, reflect, and seek meaning, which can make them question themselves more than they question the manipulator. A simple comment or subtle shift in tone can send them into hours of introspection, wondering what they could have done differently. Manipulators rely on this internal dialogue, knowing it keeps their influence alive long after the conversation has ended. People with strong inner worlds often carry hope, compassion, and the belief that others can grow if given understanding. This hopeful nature makes them patient with harmful behavior, waiting for change that rarely comes. Manipulators see this patience as an opportunity, not a gift, and they use it to extend their influence far beyond what a less empathetic person would ever allow. But perhaps the most profound reason manipulators are drawn to sensitive individuals is because these people possess something the manipulator lacks: emotional depth. A manipulator feeds off what they cannot generate within themselves. They pull from others the compassion, stability, or validation they cannot produce, creating a dynamic where the sensitive person becomes both the source of nourishment and the target of control. As you begin to recognize this truth, a new understanding forms, one that shifts the focus from the manipulator to your own inner strength, opening the way to the final realization about reclaiming your autonomy and rebuilding your center from a place of clarity and self-awareness. Once you understand why manipulators are drawn to sensitive, introspective people, something powerful begins to shift inside you. You start to see that your openness was never a weakness, but a strength that was misused by those who did not know how to handle depth. And this awareness becomes the first step toward reclaiming your autonomy. When you awaken to the subtle ways influence has shaped your thoughts, emotions, and decisions, you begin returning to yourself piece by piece. It is not an overnight transformation. It is a gentle rebuilding, a quiet recentering, a rediscovery of your inner authority that had been buried under layers of subtle pressure and emotional distortion. Reclaiming your center does not require confrontation or dramatic separation. It begins internally, with the simple act of listening to yourself again. You start recognizing when a decision feels natural and when it feels nudged. You notice when your intuition speaks and when someone else's voice echoes inside your mind, pretending to be your own. With time, you learn to trust the signals you once ignored, and this trust becomes your protection. You stop absorbing the expectations of others and begin responding from a place of clarity rather than obligation. As your awareness strengthens, something else happens. Manipulators lose access to you, not because you run from them, but because you no longer provide the emotional openings they rely on. Your boundaries sharpen, your vision clears. You become someone who cannot be easily swayed, reshaped, or redirected. And this inner transformation is what marks the true end of their influence, not a battle, not a breakup, simply a recognition that your life belongs to you again. And if you reached this point of the video, it means this message resonated with a part of you that was ready to see more clearly. If you feel that, I invite you to subscribe to the channel so you can continue exploring insights that strengthen your inner compass. Leave a comment saying something like, "This message was for me to mark this moment of awareness," and let your experience encourage others on the same journey. If the content added value to your day, give it a like to help it reach more people who might need it. And before you go, there is another video right here that deepens this understanding in a way that complements everything we uncovered today. So continue with me and keep expanding your clarity.